The survey ship, Galactic Harmony, drifted through space like a silver needle threading through black silk. Inside its pristine corridors, xenobiologist Dr. Zexhai clicked her mandibles nervously as she reviewed the data streaming across her workstation. The four-armed Vorthak had spent her entire career studying the most dangerous worlds in known space, but nothing had prepared her for what lay ahead. "Classification confirmed," announced Captain Thorne, his crystalline Etherian form shimmering with anxiety. Kepler 442c registers as a Class-15 Deathworld. Atmospheric toxicity, extreme weather patterns, hostile native fauna, and radiation levels that would kill most known species within hours. Commander Rask, a hulking Bruthan whose scarred hide spoke of countless battles, rumbled his disapproval. "Why are we even here? No intelligent life could possibly survive on such a world. The Galactic Council's resources would be better spent elsewhere." Dr. Zexhai's compound eyes reflected the warning lights flashing across her screen. "The Council wants a complete survey before officially declaring it uninhabitable. Standard protocol for Class-15 worlds. We maintain safe distance, deploy automated probes, gather data, and move on." The ship's AI, a collective consciousness known as Aria, materialized as a swirling hologram of light. "Entering orbit in 30 minutes. All crew should note that emergency protocols are now in effect. This world's danger classification exceeds anything in our database." Through the observation deck's reinforced transparasteel, the planet below looked deceptively beautiful. Swirling clouds of emerald and gold danced across a surface dotted with massive storm systems. Lightning crackled through the atmosphere with such intensity that it was visible from space, creating a deadly light show that had been mesmerizing and killing explorers for generations. Dr. Zexhai had studied the preliminary reports during their 3-month journey. Kepler 442c was a nightmare world where acid rain fell like clockwork, where the very air contained enough heavy metals to poison most known species, and where the native predators had evolved armor plating that could deflect plasma rounds. The planet's 3 moons created tidal forces so extreme that entire continents shifted monthly. Volcanic activity was constant, spewing toxic gases that would dissolve most spacecraft hulls in minutes. "First probe deployed," reported Navigation Officer Keth, her tentacles dancing across control surfaces with practiced precision. The Aquarian's gills fluttered with nervousness as she monitored the probe's descent. "Atmospheric entry in 5 minutes." The crew gathered around the main display as their probe descended through the hostile atmosphere. Static filled the signal as electromagnetic storms battered the small device. When the image finally cleared, they saw a landscape that defied imagination. Massive creatures moved through valleys carved by acid rivers. Plants with metallic leaves swayed in winds that carried enough radiation to sterilize most worlds. Geysers of molten metal erupted from the ground with such force they reached the upper atmosphere. This was a world that actively tried to kill anything that dared to exist on its surface. "Probe life expectancy?" asked Captain Thorne. 6 hours maximum," Keth replied. "The corrosive atmosphere is already eating through the protective coating." Dr. Zexhai watched in fascination as the probe revealed layer after layer of hostile environment. Magnetic storms that could fry electronics from orbit, gravity fluctuations that could crush bones, and temperature variations that swung from freezing to volcanic within hours. This world was a perfect example of why the Galactic Council had created the Deathworld classification system. Then, something impossible appeared on the screen. "Wait," Dr. Zexhai whispered, her mandibles clicking rapidly. "Zoom in on Sector 7 Alpha." The image magnified, revealing what looked like geometric patterns carved into a mountainside. Straight lines and perfect angles that nature never produced. The patterns were too regular, too purposeful to be natural formations. "Those are structures," breathed Captain Thorne, his crystalline body pulsing with disbelief. Commander Rask leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the display. Impossible. Nothing could build on that world. Look at it. The very ground shifts every few hours. But the evidence was undeniable. As the probe adjusted its position, more structures came into view. Not just buildings, but an entire settlement carved into the toxic landscape. Bridges spanned acid rivers, dome-shaped structures dotted the valley floor, and what appeared to be cultivated fields stretched between them. "Arya," Captain Thorne called, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Full spectral analysis of those structures. I want to know what they're made of, who built them, and how long they've been there." The AI's response came within seconds. Structures appear to be constructed from locally sourced materials. Age estimates suggest continuous habitation for approximately 200 standard years. Energy signatures indicate active power sources and life signs. The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Dr. Zexhai felt her heart's racing as the implications hit her. Someone had not only survived on this Class-15 Deathworld, but had thrived there for 2 centuries. "Deploy additional probes," Captain Thorne ordered. "I want eyes on that entire settlement, and prepare a communication array. If there are survivors down there, they might need immediate evacuation." Over the next several hours, the probes revealed the impossible truth. The settlement wasn't just surviving. It was expanding. New construction was evident along the southern edge. Fields of unknown crops flourished in soil that should have been toxic death, and the energy readings suggested a population in the thousands. "Captain," Keth announced, her voice trembling with excitement, "we're receiving a signal from the surface. It's on standard galactic frequency." The main display flickered, then resolved into an image that made the entire crew gasp. A bipedal figure stood before what appeared to be a communication array, waving at them. The being was tall and lean, covered in some kind of protective suit, but clearly alive and aware of their presence. Captain Thorne activated the communication system. "This is Captain Thorne of the Galactic Survey Ship Harmony. Can you understand us?" The response came immediately, in perfect galactic standard. "Welcome to New Eden Colony, Captain. This is Administrator Sarah Chen. We've been wondering when someone would finally show up to check on us." Dr. Zexhai's mandibles clicked so rapidly they created a buzzing sound. Commander Rask's scarred hide rippled with disbelief. The entire crew stared at the display as if they were seeing a ghost. You're human," Captain Thorne managed to say. The figure on the screen laughed, a sound that seemed impossibly cheerful, given the circumstances. "Guilty as charged. Though I have to say, you folks took your time getting here. We sent our initial settlement reports over the quantum relay almost 200 years ago." "Settlement reports?" Dr. Zexhai interjected, unable to contain herself. "You intentionally colonized a Class-15 Deathworld?" "Class-15?" Sarah Chen's voice carried a note of confusion. "Is that what you're calling it? We just called it home. Though I'll admit, the first few decades were a bit rough." Commander Rask stepped forward, his massive form filling the communication pickup. "How many of you are down there?" "Current population is about 12,000, Sarah replied casually as if discussing the weather. "We've got 3 major settlements and about 50 smaller outposts scattered across the continent. Oh, and we just celebrated our first grandchildren born in the new atmospheric processors last month." The bridge crew exchanged glances of pure bewilderment. Atmospheric processors? On a Class-15 Deathworld? "Ms. Chen," Captain Thorne said carefully, "are you aware that your world is classified as completely uninhabitable? The radiation alone should have killed you within hours of landing." Another laugh echoed from the speakers. "Oh, you mean the background radiation? Yeah, that was a problem at first. but you'd be amazed what a little genetic therapy and some good old-fashioned engineering can accomplish. Plus, the locals aren't as unfriendly as they seem once you get to know them." "The locals?" Dr. Zexhai whispered, her compound eyes focusing on the massive predators visible in the probe feeds. "The thornbacks mostly," Sarah explained. "Took us about 50 years to figure out their mating calls. Turns out they're actually quite intelligent. We have several that help with the heavy construction work now." The image of humans domesticating creatures that could tear through starship hulls sent another wave of disbelief through the crew. Commander Rask's scarred hide was now rippling constantly, a sign of severe agitation among his species. "Perhaps," Captain Thorne said diplomatically, "we could arrange a meeting. We'd like to understand how you've adapted to your environment." "Of course." Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious. "Though I should warn you, our air isn't exactly breathable for most species, too much sulfur and too many heavy metals. But we've got environmental suits you can borrow. They're rated for most of the local hazards." "Most of the local hazards?" Dr. Zexhai asked weakly. "Well, they won't protect you from a direct lightning strike during storm season, and they're not much good against the acid geysers if you're standing right next to one when it goes off. But for casual wandering around the colony, they should keep you alive for a few days at least." The casual mention of survival being measured in days made the entire crew collectively shudder. This was supposed to be the safest option the humans could offer. "We'll need to run some safety protocols first," Captain Thorne managed. "Perhaps we could start with a brief orbital survey while we prepare for surface contact." "Take your time," Sarah replied cheerfully. "We're not going anywhere. Though you might want to avoid the southern hemisphere for the next few days. Volcano season is starting up, and things get a bit exciting down there." As the communication ended, the bridge fell into stunned silence. Dr. Zexhai stared at the display showing the thriving human settlement, trying to process what she had witnessed. Every instinct, every piece of scientific training, told her that what she was seeing was impossible. Commander Rask was the first to break the silence. "Either our classification system is completely wrong, or humans are the most insane species in the galaxy." "Both," Captain Thorne replied quietly, his crystalline form flickering with rapid thoughts. "Definitely both." Dr. Zexhai pulled up the detailed probe data, studying the impossible colony below. Humans had not just survived on a world that should have killed them instantly. They had built a civilization. They had turned a nightmare into a home, transformed a death world into a garden. As she watched the probe feeds showing humans working alongside creatures that had been classified as extremely hostile, tending gardens that grew in toxic soil, and building structures that withstood acid rain and volcanic eruptions, one thought kept echoing in her mind. What kind of species chooses to make their home in hell itself? The answer, she was beginning to realize, might change everything they thought they knew about the limits of life in the universe. As the galactic harmony orbited the impossible world below, Dr. Zexhai prepared to document the most extraordinary discovery in galactic history. The humans had found a way to thrive where survival should have been impossible. Now she had to figure out how they had done it, and what it meant for every other species in the galaxy. The probe feeds continued to stream impossible images, human children playing in what should have been toxic wasteland, farmers harvesting crops that shouldn't exist, engineers building with materials that should have dissolved their tools. Each image raised more questions than it answered. As Dr. Zexhai began her preliminary analysis, one thing became crystal clear. They weren't just observing a colony anymore. They were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in galactic civilization. Dr. Zexhai checked her environmental suit for the 15th time as the shuttle descended through Kepler 442c's hostile atmosphere. The reinforced hull groaned under the pressure of electromagnetic storms, and warning lights bathed the cabin in an ominous red glow. Beside her, Commander Rask muttered prayers in his native Bruthan tongue, while Captain Thorne's crystalline form flickered with nervous energy. "Approaching landing coordinates," announced their pilot, a steady-nerved Vorthak named Kix, whose four arms danced across the controls with mechanical precision. "Local weather shows acid precipitation at 70% concentration and electromagnetic interference at dangerous levels." Through the shuttle's reinforced viewport, the landscape below looked like something from a fever dream. Geysers of molten metal erupted from scarred earth, casting shadows across forests of metallic trees that swayed in toxic winds. Lightning arced between floating rock formations that defied gravity, while creatures the size of starships moved through valleys carved by rivers of acid. "There," Dr. Zexhai pointed to a cleared area where geometric patterns broke the chaos of the natural landscape. "The landing zone." As they descended, the patterns resolved into an intricate network of buildings, walkways, and gardens that seemed to flow organically with the harsh terrain. What had appeared from orbit as a simple settlement revealed itself as a masterwork of engineering adapted to impossible conditions. The shuttle touched down on a landing pad, constructed from some kind of crystalline material that seemed to absorb and redirect the constant electromagnetic discharge from the atmosphere. Dr. Zexhai watched in amazement as lightning struck the landing surface and was channeled away through a network of conducting pathways built into the ground itself. "Welcome to New Eden Colony," came Sarah Chen's voice through their communication system. "Quite a view, isn't it?" A figure approached through the swirling, toxic atmosphere, moving with easy confidence across terrain that should have been instantly lethal. The human wore a suit that looked nothing like the bulky environmental gear Dr. Zexhai was familiar with. Instead, it appeared to be a sleek, form-fitting second skin that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. "Your suits," Dr. Zexhai managed to say through her helmet's communication system, "they're not standard protection gear." Sarah laughed, her voice clear despite the howling winds. "Standard gear wouldn't last 10 minutes here. These are biosynthetic interfaces, part technology, part engineered organism. They adapt to environmental changes in real time and actually grow stronger when exposed to most of the hazards here." Commander Rask's scarred hide rippled beneath his own environmental suit. "You're wearing living organisms as protection?" "Living organisms that we've convinced to like us," Sarah corrected cheerfully. "Turns out, once you figure out the biochemistry, a lot of the local life forms are surprisingly cooperative. This particular species, we call them symbiotes, actually thrives on the kind of radiation that would cook most other life forms." As they walked toward the main settlement, Dr. Zexhai cataloged impossibility after impossibility. Plants grew in soil that her instruments registered as toxic enough to dissolve most known materials. Structures stood firm despite acid rain that should have corroded them to nothing. Most remarkably, human children ran and played in areas where her suit's radiation detectors screamed continuous warnings. "How?" she asked, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. 200 years of very determined problem-solving," Sarah replied. "Also, a fair amount of genetic modification, symbiotic relationships with local species, and what my grandmother used to call stubborn human stupidity." They passed through what Sarah called the agricultural district, where impossible crops grew in careful rows. Dr. Zexhai knelt beside one of the plants, her suit's sensors working overtime to analyze what she was seeing. "These readings can't be correct," she murmured. "This plant should be dead, the soil composition alone." "Should have killed it, yes," agreed a new voice. Dr. Zexhai looked up to see an elderly human approaching, his face weathered, but his eyes bright with intelligence. "I'm Dr. Marcus Webb, the colony's chief geneticist. I've been working on those particular crops for about 60 years now." 60 years? Captain Thorne's form shimmered with disbelief. How is that possible? The radiation exposure alone should have given me cancer, should have destroyed my DNA, should have killed me in a dozen different ways, Dr. Webb finished with a grin. And it tried, believe me. But humans are remarkably good at adapting when we have to, plus we've made some friends along the way. He gestured to what Dr. Zexhai had initially taken for decorative stones scattered throughout the garden. As she looked closer, she realized they were moving, slowly, deliberately, but definitely alive. Silicon-based organisms, Dr. Webb explained. They feed on radiation and excrete compounds that neutralize most of the soil toxins. In exchange, we provide them with trace minerals their metabolisms need. It's a beautiful symbiotic relationship. Commander Rask knelt beside one of the creatures, his massive form dwarfing the meter-wide organism. You've domesticated the local life forms? Domesticated implies control, Sarah said. We prefer to think of it as negotiated coexistence, though I'll admit the first 50 years involved a lot of trial and error, mostly error. They continued through the settlement, each new area revealing fresh impossibilities. The engineering district showcased structures that seemed to grow rather than being built, their surfaces rippling with living metal that adapted to changing environmental conditions. The residential areas housed families in dwellings that Dr. Zexhai's instruments insisted should have collapsed under their own weight, yet somehow remained perfectly stable. The key, explained Chief Engineer Rosa Valdez as she guided them through a facility that processed atmospheric gases, was learning to work with the planet instead of against it. Every hostile feature of this world turned out to have potential applications once we figured out how to approach them properly. She led them to an observation deck overlooking a vast installation where massive creatures, the thornbacks that Sarah had mentioned, were helping to construct what appeared to be a new atmospheric processor. The sight of humans working alongside creatures that could have crushed them without effort left the alien crew speechless. How do you communicate with them? Dr. Zexhai asked. Biochemical signals mostly, Rosa replied. Turns out they're incredibly sophisticated. Once we learned their language, which took about 40 years, we discovered they've been trying to improve the planet's atmosphere for millennia. They just needed better tools. Better tools? Commander Rask's voice carried a note of incredulity. Human engineering? Rosa said with obvious pride. We might not be the strongest or the fastest species, but we're excellent at making tools, and even better at making friends who can use those tools effectively. They spent the rest of the day touring facilities that redefined the impossible, power plants that converted volcanic activity into clean energy, water processing plants that turned acid rain into drinking water, medical facilities where human doctors worked alongside alien biologists to develop treatments for conditions that shouldn't exist. But it was the education center that truly stunned Dr. Zexhai. Human children sat in classrooms learning alongside young thornbacks, while teachers explained complex biochemistry using interactive models of local ecosystems. The casual integration of species that should have been natural enemies demonstrated something profound about human adaptability. You're not just surviving here, Dr. Zexhai realized. You're building something entirely new. The next step in human evolution, we like to think, replied Director Elena Vasquez, the colony's head of education. Our children are growing up in symbiosis with an entire ecosystem. They're learning to think in ways that previous generations never could. As if to demonstrate her point, a human child, no more than 8 standard years old, approached their group, chattering in a complex mixture of sounds that Dr. Zexhai's translator struggled to interpret. Beside the child walked a juvenile thornback, its armored plates gleaming in the toxic sunlight. They're discussing the optimal pH levels for the new water gardens, Elena translated casually. Apparently, they've figured out how to accelerate the neutralization process by introducing a third species into the symbiotic cycle. Commander Rask stared at the child who was casually solving environmental problems that would challenge most galactic scientists. These children, they think differently. Of course they do, Elena smiled. They've never known a world where survival didn't require cooperation, adaptation, and creative thinking. Every day of their lives has been a lesson in turning problems into opportunities. As the sun set, or rather as the planet's rotation carried them toward the night side, and the sky filled with aurora caused by atmospheric radiation, Dr. Zexhai found herself struggling to process everything she had witnessed. "I need to understand," she said to Sarah as they stood on an observation platform overlooking the entire colony. "How did you know this would work? How did the first settlers survive long enough to establish any of this?" Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "They almost didn't. The first decade was brutal. We lost a lot of good people to radiation poisoning, toxic exposure, accidents with the local wildlife. But humans have this peculiar trait. The worse things get, the more determined we become to prove they can get better. But the risks were enormous, yes, but so was the potential. Earth was overcrowded, resources were stretched thin, and humanity needed room to grow. When the colony ship Endurance arrived here, the crew faced a choice: try to find another world, or figure out how to make this one work. And they chose to stay? They chose to fight for it, Sarah corrected. Every generation since then has built on what came before, solved new problems, formed new partnerships with local species, pushed the boundaries of what's possible a little further. Dr. Zexhai watched as the colony's lights came on in the gathering darkness, each glow representing human ingenuity adapted to impossible circumstances. Bioluminescent guide paths showed the way between buildings, while electromagnetic collectors gathered energy from the constant lightning strikes. "You've created something unprecedented," she said quietly, "a multi-species civilization based on true cooperation rather than dominance." "We've created home," Sarah replied simply. "It's just not the kind of home most species would choose." As they returned to the guest quarters, rooms carved into living rock that somehow maintained perfect temperature and air quality, Dr. Zexhai realized that her understanding of what constituted habitable had been fundamentally changed. The humans hadn't just survived on a Class-15 Deathworld. They had transformed it into something new, something that transcended traditional concepts of habitability. They had proven that with enough determination, creativity, and willingness to adapt, even the most hostile environment could become a thriving home. But as she settled into her quarters for the night, listening to the sounds of the impossible colony around her, Dr. Zexhai couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. The ease with which humans had adapted to impossible conditions, their casual integration with deadly alien life forms, their children's intuitive understanding of complex environmental systems. It suggested something deeper about human nature that she was only beginning to glimpse. Outside her window, lightning danced across the toxic sky, while bioluminescent creatures moved through gardens that shouldn't exist. Somewhere in the distance, humans and Thornbacks worked together on night construction projects, their cooperation so natural it seemed inevitable rather than miraculous. Tomorrow she would begin her formal scientific analysis. Tonight she simply watched in wonder as an impossible civilization went about its daily business of thriving in hell itself. Dr. Zexhai stood in the colony's central laboratory, surrounded by data that challenged everything she thought she knew about life in the universe. For 3 days she had run tests, collected samples, and interviewed colonists. Each result only deepened the mystery of how humans had achieved the impossible. "The genetic modifications are extensive but subtle," she reported to Captain Thorne during their morning briefing. "Enhanced radiation resistance, improved toxin processing, increased bone density, modified hemoglobin for better oxygen efficiency in hostile atmospheres. But here's what I can't understand. The modifications follow no known pattern. It's as if they were developed through trial and error rather than systematic genetic engineering. Commander Rask leaned forward, his scarred hide rippling with interest. Are you suggesting they experimented on themselves? I'm suggesting they lived through the experiments, Dr. Zexhai replied. Each generation adapted further to local conditions. What we're seeing isn't just genetic modification. It's accelerated evolution in real time. Captain Thorne's crystalline form flickered with concern. That should be impossible. Evolution requires thousands of generations, not mere centuries. Unless, Dr. Zexhai said quietly, you're dealing with a species that refuses to accept the word impossible. Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah Chen entering the laboratory, followed by an elderly woman whose presence seemed to command immediate respect from everyone around her. I'd like you to meet Director Catherine Sterling, Sarah said. She's one of our original colonists, arrived on the Endurance 200 years ago. Dr. Zexhai stared at the human woman, her instruments confirming what should have been biologically impossible. You're over 200 years old? Catherine smiled, her eyes sharp despite her advanced age. 237 next month, though I stopped counting after the first century, tends to make the younger folks nervous. How? Commander Rask asked bluntly. The same way we do everything else here, Catherine replied. We figured out how to make it work. Turns out some of the local organisms produce compounds that dramatically slow cellular aging. We call them fountain symbiotes, microscopic organisms that live in our bloodstream and repair damage faster than it accumulates. Dr. Zexhai's compound eyes focused intently on the elderly woman. You're hosting alien organisms in your bloodstream? We're hosting partners in our bloodstream, Catherine corrected gently. Everything here is about partnership, cooperation, mutual benefit. That's the secret humans brought to this world. We're really good at making friends. Even with organisms that should kill you? Catherine's laugh was rich with 2 centuries of accumulated wisdom. Especially with organisms that should kill us. We've learned that the deadlier something is, the more useful it can be once you figure out how to work with it rather than against it. Over the following hours, Catherine shared the true history of New Eden Colony. Dr. Zexhai listened with growing amazement as the elderly woman described decades of careful negotiation with hostile ecosystems, generations of gradual adaptation, and countless small victories that had built into something unprecedented. The first year, Catherine recalled, we lost 60% of our population. The second year, we lost 40% of what remained. By the end of the 5th year, most galactic experts would have declared the colony a complete failure. What changed? Captain Thorne asked. We stopped trying to survive despite the planet, Catherine replied, and started learning to survive because of it. Every challenge became an opportunity to develop new solutions. Every threat became a potential ally once we understood it properly. She led them to a memorial wall where thousands of names were carved into living stone that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. We remember everyone who died learning how to live here. Their sacrifices taught us that this world doesn't hate us. It just operates by different rules than the ones we grew up with. Dr. Zexhai studied the wall, noting that the death rates had decreased dramatically after the first few decades. You learned to adapt the planet's rules to your needs. We learned to adapt our needs to the planet's rules, Catherine corrected. There's a difference. Most species try to force their environment to match their biology. Humans learn to modify their biology to match their environment. As if summoned by their conversation, a group of children approached the memorial. Dr. Zexhai watched in fascination as they performed what appeared to be a daily ritual, placing their hands on the bioluminescent names and whispering words in the complex hybrid language they had developed. They're thanking the ancestors for their sacrifices, Sarah explained, and promising to continue pushing the boundaries of what's possible. One of the children, a girl no more than 10 years old, approached Dr. Zexhai directly. When she spoke, her words carried harmonics that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. "She's asking if you'd like to see the deep gardens," Sarah translated. "They're where we grow the most advanced symbiotic organisms." The deep gardens turned out to be caverns far beneath the colony where humans worked alongside creatures that defied every classification system Dr. Zexhai knew. Massive organisms that seemed part plant, part machine, and part something entirely unprecedented, stretched through underground chambers. Humans moved among them like gardeners tending flowers. But these were gardens that processed raw planetary energy into forms that could sustain life. "How long have you been developing these?" Dr. Zexhai asked, her instrument struggling to categorize what she was seeing. "About 150 years," replied the child who had led them here. "My great-great-grandmother started the first cultivation chambers. We've been improving them ever since." Commander Rask stared at organisms that dwarfed his massive frame. "These creatures are larger than most buildings. How do you communicate with them?" "Biochemically, mostly," the child replied matter-of-factly, "though the older ones are developing electromagnetic communication capabilities. We think they're trying to learn our radio languages." The casual mention of planet-sized organisms attempting to learn human technology sent another wave of disbelief through the alien crew. Dr. Zexhai realized she was witnessing something that transcended normal concepts of civilization. This was symbiosis on a planetary scale. "You've turned the entire world into a cooperative organism," she breathed. "We've become part of the world's natural development," Catherine corrected. "Humans don't conquer environments. We become part of them. It's our greatest strength and our most defining characteristic." As they returned to the surface, Dr. Zexhai found herself grappling with implications that stretched far beyond a single impossible colony. "What you've accomplished here, it changes everything we thought we knew about habitability, about the limits of biological adaptation, about what constitutes a livable world." More than that, Captain Thorne realized, his crystalline form pulsing with rapid thoughts. "It changes what we know about humans. If they can adapt to a Class-15 Deathworld, there may be no environment in the galaxy that's truly uninhabitable for them." Sarah and Catherine exchanged glances that suggested they had been expecting this realization. "There's something else you should know," Sarah said carefully. "New Eden isn't the only human colony on a classified death world." Dr. Zexhai felt her mandibles click involuntarily. "What do you mean?" Catherine's smile carried the weight of centuries of accumulated secrets. "Humans have been quietly settling worlds that other species abandoned as uninhabitable for over 300 years. There are colonies on ice worlds where the atmosphere freezes solid, on gas giants where floating cities ride permanent hurricane winds, on worlds where the very rocks are radioactive enough to power starships." "How many?" Commander Rask asked quietly. 47 confirmed colonies," Sarah replied. "Probably more by now. Humans don't just survive in impossible places. We thrive there. It's what we do." The revelation hit the alien crew like a physical blow. 47 colonies on worlds classified as uninhabitable. Humans hadn't just stumbled onto one unlikely survival story. They had made surviving the impossible into a defining characteristic of their species. "Why hasn't the Galactic Council been informed?" Captain Thorne demanded. "We tried," Catherine said sadly. 2 centuries ago, we sent detailed reports about our successes, our techniques, our willingness to share what we'd learned. The response was uniform across every species. Humans were clearly lying, exaggerating, or had discovered worlds that weren't actually as dangerous as reported. The Council refused to believe humans could succeed where everyone else failed, Sarah added. So we stopped trying to convince them and focused on what we do best, turning impossible situations into thriving communities. Dr. Zexahai understood now why the discovery of New Eden had felt so significant. This wasn't just one remarkable colony. It was her first glimpse into a hidden aspect of human expansion that had been quietly proceeding, while the rest of the galaxy dismissed humans as a relatively unremarkable species. "You're redefining the very concept of habitability," she said. "Every world we've written off as uninhabitable might actually be a potential human colony." "Every world is a potential human colony," Catherine corrected gently. "We just need time to figure out how to make it work." As their visit drew to a close, Dr. Zexahai found herself standing once again on the observation deck overlooking the impossible colony. Children played in toxic gardens while their parents worked alongside creatures that should have killed them. Engineers collaborated with planet-sized organisms on projects that spanned geological timescales. Scientists pushed the boundaries of what biology could achieve through cooperation rather than competition. "What are you going to tell the Galactic Council?" Sarah asked as they prepared for departure. Dr. Zexahai considered her options carefully. She could file a standard report classifying New Eden as an anomaly, a single remarkable exception that didn't change the fundamental rules of habitability. She could focus on the scientific achievements without emphasizing their broader implications. She could maintain the status quo and let humanity continue its quiet expansion into impossible worlds. Or she could tell the truth. "I'm going to tell them," she said finally, "that we need to completely revise our understanding of what constitutes a habitable world. I'm going to tell them that humans have been successfully colonizing planets we thought were uninhabitable for centuries, and I'm going to recommend that the Council formally request human assistance in developing new worlds that we've previously written off as hopeless." Captain Thorne's form shimmered with approval. "It will cause quite a stir in the scientific community." "It should," Dr. Zexahai replied. "The galaxy is much larger than we thought it was, and humanity has been quietly proving that for longer than any of us realized." As the shuttle lifted off from the crystalline landing pad, Dr. Zexahai watched New Eden Colony shrink below them. But even as the details disappeared, the implications of what she had witnessed continued to expand in her mind. Humans didn't just survive in impossible environments. They transformed impossible environments into homes. They didn't just adapt to hostile worlds. They formed partnerships with hostile worlds that benefited every form of life involved. They didn't just push the boundaries of what was possible. They redefined possibility itself. The rest of the galaxy had spent millennia cataloging worlds as habitable or uninhabitable, suitable or dangerous, possible or impossible. Humans had spent the same millennia proving that these categories were meaningless limitations rather than natural laws. As the galactic harmony departed orbit, Dr. Zexahai began composing the report that would change everything. A report about a species that had quietly been making the impossible routine for centuries. A report about humans who had looked at the most hostile world in known space and decided to call it home. A report about the day she learned that when humans encountered the impossible, they didn't turn back. They rolled up their sleeves and got to work.